Good morning, dear colleagues. On behalf of the Executive Agency for Education, Culture and Audiovisual under the European Commission and the National Erasmus Plus Office, we would like to welcome the participants and speakers of the webinar, The Culture of Academic Writing. The webinar is organized jointly by National Erasmus Plus Office and Academic Writing Center of Nazarbayev University in the framework of the International Erasmus 2019 Day. Kazakh universities are widely involved in the celebration of that International Erasmus Day, but though this is for the first time. And we appreciate that over 30 higher education institutions from 12 regions and 2 national agencies, Center of Bologna Process and Independent Agency for Quality Assurance in Education, during 3 days from 10th till 12th, will be sharing and will be still sharing good practices of projects, organizing a wide variety of activities. Their reports with video and photo materials would be uploaded on the website later, and some of them are available already on the Facebook. A summary of the Erasmus 2019 Day celebration would be presented also at the Erasmus Plus Information Day on the 7th of November, which will be hosted by the Almaty Technological University, and the information on our Information Day is also available on our website. For the present webinar, we have over 300 participants registered from 17 regions and 1 participant even from Hong Kong. Such interest to the webinar demonstrates that its theme is extremely relevant and really demand-driven. The webinar is organized as follow-up of the Technical Assistance Mission Seminar on Academic Integrity, which was organized by NEO with the support of Executive Agency and hosted by the Kazakh University of Law in Nur-Sultan in May this year. We got very positive feedback from the participants on the relevance of the topic, and we see the need for in-depth understanding and implementation of principles of academic integrity among Kazakh higher education institutions. One of the key messages of this seminar was that academic integrity is not only about imposing rules and detecting plagiarism, but also about teaching good academic practices and building the culture of integrity. Given that Nazarbayev University has a culture and experience in teaching new students about proper academic practice, we decided to organize a joint webinar where Nazarbayev University teachers could have a leading role. We would like to thank our colleagues at Nazarbayev University who made it possible to organize the present webinar. Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, Professor Loretta O'Donnell, Dr. Duncan Priestley, Head of Academic Quality Enhancement, Office of the Provost, and staff of the School of Sciences and Humanities hosting the Academic Writing Center. Professor Kerry Lynn Pichinsky, Director, instructors, speakers of the today webinar, these nice ladies, Professor Malgorzata Kruszewska and Miss Adina Camelia Arvato. We would also like to say thank you to Ricardo Braganza, instructional designer, Ayman Hamitova, Senior Manager of Innovative Learning Center, for supporting in the organization of the seminar. And a special thanks goes from us to Sabina Mindagazieva, Experience Sharing Coordinator, Office for Experience Sharing, and other people who were involved in the preparation of the present webinar, for example, at our office. The target group of the webinar, academic writing, is diverse, and we hope that the presentations would meet their expectations. We understand that in one short webinar, it is impossible to cover comprehensively all aspects of academic writing. We view the webinar, today's webinar, as a starting point for further cooperation with the Writing Center of NU, and I hope you share our expectations as well. The universities and academe who are interested to have a more in-depth understanding of the topic can contact, I hope, the Nazarbayev University Academic Writing Center directly or via the Office for Experience Sharing to discuss further cooperation activities beyond this webinar. So this is the topic of the webinar. Gulmira, could you please switch on to the program? Gulmira, could you please switch on to the program? And some technical aspects. We ask all participants to ask their questions in written form via the chat. There is a tool allowing to do so, and in English. I see some questions in Russian and in the Kazakh language. Unfortunately, today we are not able to answer their questions in these two languages. Today's webinar is purely in English. Those people who are interested to have access to the webinar in Kazakh and in Russian can join us later. We'll announce the dates because we are going to organize the seminar, also the webinar, also in Kazakh and in Russian, but it will be somewhere in November, not today. That's why microphones of the participants will be shut down to avoid noise and to ensure that the speakers are heard clearly. The questions can be answered, some of them maybe after each presentation we'll see, but mainly at the end of the session. And we can see the questions in the chat and relevant speakers would be able to respond. So these are technical aspects. Once more, welcome to the webinar. And let's see the program. So the welcome part is over. Можно поближе к орбитру? Now the floor goes to Malgorzata. So you see academic writing as a conversation. So please, Malgorzata, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us and thank you for sharing your experience, please.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and we thank you once again for involving us in this wonderful Erasmus project. It's something that we consider ourselves to be quite good at, which is working with students in the subject of academic writing. And this is a particularly interesting topic that we have for you today, the focus being on academic writing as conversation. So as a follow-up to that wonderful intro, yes, I encourage you to list your questions at the end of our presentations so that we can have a nice flow between Adina and myself addressing this topic. So we are focused very much on supporting a culture of writing here at Nazarbayev University, and as it specifically applies to this part of the world. And we're very fortunate here at Nazarbayev University to have one of the largest writing programs in the region, which supports writing classes, but also writing center activities. As professors in the department, all of us do both. We have individual consultations with our students, and we also teach actual academic writing courses. So to think about academic writing as a conversation, I invite you into the possibility of rethinking your ideas about what it means to be a writer within this academic field. Our conversations here at Nazarbayev University among our faculty members are frequent about what it takes to encourage our students to be better writers in the global international world that they are entering and are already a part of. So these conversations amongst us are frequent and are very lively. They're constantly changing in terms of information and research that we are conducting and that we experience in the classroom. So we'd like to share some of what we have accumulated as our experience working specifically here. Let's consider the topic of academic writing, which often feels intimidating to both instructors and students. Let's consider it more as a real conversation. And in starting a conversation, I'd like to use the image of inviting people to a dinner party. Now, myself, I was raised in the Polish culture with a name like Małgorzata Kruszewska, you may have guessed that. And I was taught by my mother not only how to host a very good dinner party, but also when you're invited, you always bring something to the table, So keep that in mind. We invite you to our dinner party discussing academic writing as conversation. We thank you for your interest and presence, and we invite you to join in the conversation. So at this table, imagine that we have to make room for all voices. That's what we do in academic writing. And we intuitively know what might make a good conversation. For example, it involves listening. It involves reflecting on what is being discussed, evaluating different points of view and different voices, and then engaging in conversation and responding to it with our own voice. The same is true in academic writing. The first step to enjoying this process, and academic writing is a process, and you can enjoy it. It takes many steps, though. In a true process, it's not necessarily in a linear way. It's a back and forth movement, much the same way a good conversation is if you participate in it. In academic writing, this conversation is largely determined by our field of interest, our discipline, both in reading and in writing, and specifically in publishing with journals relevant to our field. So we have different tools and materials that we are working with in order to create deeper conversations. The next consideration for any kind of good conversation is how to introduce yourself. And in academic writing, this might involve identifying and engaging with theory within a theoretical framework. So we'll be providing examples of this in the follow-up presentation by my colleague, Dr. Arvatu. When we speak about engaging in a conversation, we're describing the beginning phase of writing, which is responding to research already there and eventually adding to it. And this is the foundation that academic writing is based on. This is also an invitation into the discourse of a particular community or specific field, and we'll discuss these specific words such as discourse. The field will then be largely determine how you structure your argument. And it's not argument in the sense of a knockdown debate or a fight. It's argument in the sense of being able to persuade the reader to understand your point of view based on your data and research. So how you will go about with both including previous voices, such as scholars and authorities in the field, theorists, people known for their ideas in your field and that have done research on it, how you will go about including these and your own, adding your own into the mix, is very much what we talk about when we talk about a culture of academic writing. Hence, we need to acknowledge the work of others through proper citation conventions, or we might have to present our work within certain processes and formats, such as the IMRAD research report, very common in the sciences. And once again, we'll come back to this in the next presentation. And finally, when you get to the point of publishing, the process of actually publishing brings our voices into yet a larger arena where we contribute to the knowledge in that field. And it allows others to respond to our arguments and our insights. So you see, it's multi-phase, and it involves a lot of different directions that are being built up in order to invite you to this table. Well, as you can tell, what I described is actually a very dynamic, exciting dinner party revolving around academic writing. And it's far from the boring, formulaic approach that perhaps you or your students may have originally anticipated when thinking about academic writing. In fact, it's an ongoing conversation. It is constantly in flux. It is constantly changing. However, there are certain agreements of how to write so that we can both share more easily, and also we can invite others into the conversation, such as junior scholars and our students. So what we have prepared for you here is to introduce you to some of the theories and ideas in academic writing, one of which we will refer to is the rhetorical situation. This is the ability to identify and assess the environment in which you are writing, including the purpose, your audience, and context. And these will largely determine the actual content in many ways. It might include specific word choices appropriate to your readers, or certain ways to organize sections, such as the introduction, methods, results, and discussion, common in most science reports. But these do not have to be restrictions, and I'd like for you to consider that, because a lot of times people do feel inhibited by it. They can instead be viewed as opportunities to develop your writing and your research methods, for that matter. If you realize and accept that writing is in fact an ongoing process with multiple back and forth steps, of course it results in a product, the final paper, but in that process is where you are thinking through the ideas also. And at each of these phases, we're growing in our understanding of how ourselves and others are shaping the discourse of our specific community, and then that is shared via presentations or publishing. So this is what we'll be considering during this session. What actually makes academic writing academic? It can't be just the use of fancy words or jargon. How do we understand the factors that shape the process of writing? If we're not merely adhering to writing conventions, such as those required of a dissertation or a research report or an abstract, then how do we more fully enter into that academic community through our written words, our conversation? Our experience as a fully supported writing program here at Nazarbayev University has certainly given us many years of checking out different models, different paradigms, different ways of going about this. And the pedagogical approach in the Writing Center also encourages the one-to-one consultations where we really understand the ability to tailor writing process to the student. And what we witness is that the process of writing goes through similar phases for everyone, regardless of the professional level. So the anxiety, perhaps, or the procrastination or the dread of coming up with a first draft is felt from student to professor level. It's a messy process. There is something that defies the sense of trying to make it very orderly. But within that messy process, we also realize that everyone comes to figure out how they can work it out for themselves. So in that sense, it's both individual, and yet it has these certain parameters of meeting expectations, whether they be set by others in the field, by previous research, by expectations from our assignments or our committee members. And so therefore everyone actually does go through, say, the agony of trying to meet a deadline. These are factors beyond our control, and yet we can work within them. So we will briefly be talking about how does this actually look like on the level of academic writing. We'll touch on these expectations of academic writing, both from the writer and the reader point of view. What does it mean when we talk about specific language? What does it mean when we talk about ideas of precision and conciseness? So with this, I'd like to introduce some of the main concepts, theories that are driving our paradigm, our model of how to create better writers amongst our students and even amongst our faculty members. With that, I'd like to bring in my colleague, Adina, who will talk about some of these concepts. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Margareta, for the wonderful introduction to the very complex topic of academic writing. I will continue in the good fashion of academic conversations. I will continue this conversation by sort of providing you with a little bit more of our framework, the way that we sort of we teach writing and how students come to experience and writing, academic writing, and become experienced writers. Okay, so first of all, just picking up on what Margaret was saying, academic writing is a conversation. What does that mean? It means that it has a response structure. It is a situated social activity. So for a long time, I too used to think that writing is a deeply individual, personal thing. But then, as I became more and more experienced as a writer, I realized that, yes, absolutely, as Malgorzata pointed out, it is deeply personal, deeply individual, and yet deeply, deeply social. With this metaphor of a conversation, what we are trying to do is to encourage students to consider writing not just as an individual thing, but rather a social activity that they can participate in and that they can become good at. We also encourage them to consider writing from the point of view of the context surrounding that writing, not just from the point of view of the text itself, the final product, as it were. So, in brief, in other words, we encourage them to view writing as a rhetorical and social process. Okay, let's see what that means. Okay, so that we don't sound just jargony, full of jargon and academic in a bad sense. Consider this very situation that we're in as a rhetorical situation. What are the basic elements of that? Well, we have the subject, which is academic writing. We have the writer or speaker. In this case, for now, it's me, but it was also Malgorzata. It's us at the Writing Center. We have the audience, you. We're very fortunate to have you as our audience. And what happens between us is this back and forth about academic writing. What follows from this entire situation is a text. But other than these basic elements, we have lots of other invisible, if you want, factors that influence or make today, for instance, a good conversation or a not so good conversation. Okay, all of these other factors fall under context. Okay, but let's stay with the text for a little bit. Okay, because when you have a message to communicate, yes, you might consider modes or ways to get that message across. How do you do that? Well, the Greeks had very fun words for these ways, and they are logos, ethos, and pathos. I have put them on the diagram for you to actually orient you a little bit before we talk about them. So logos, what is it? It's a way of getting your message across by making claims, by giving reasons, by producing evidence, by appealing to your audience's knowledge of the topic. So we encourage students to think of logos as this mode of arguing or getting your message across as answering a number of questions like, what is my topic? What is the issue that I want to address? What is known about it? Is there something unknown about it? What can be reasonably said about it? Okay. The other mode would be ethos. It's the appeal to character. And yes, you are right. If you anticipate ethos to have something to do with ethics, it is very, very true. It's about character. So the Greeks were thinking of ethos in that way, and we continue to think about ethos, about ethics, as building a good character. In our situation, in writing, what that means is projecting the right attributes to establish your credibility as a writer. So it's a mode of getting your message across that focuses on you, if you want, okay? But it means, and this is where we encourage our students to consider these questions. What qualifies me to talk about this topic or issue to this audience? Why should they trust me? Okay? And that doesn't mean that they have to produce any kind of diplomas. No. All you need to do is basically project the right academic attributes: integrity, carefulness, thoughtfulness, good reasoning, good knowledge. Finally, another mode of getting your message across would be to go with pathos, establishing some common ground with your audience. That's when you want to ask yourself as a writer, who is my audience? In this case, who is my audience? What do they know already about my topic, about academic writing? To a large extent, their knowledge and their beliefs are going to generate a set of expectations about the conversation that we're having. Good. So I hope that I've given you some examples to wrap your heads around this a bit foreign sounding, more theoretical notion of rhetorical appeals and rhetorical situation. And I'll give you a few more, just a couple more. And here's another fun one that also was proposed by the Greeks. Remember that I was telling you about the other factors, contextual factors, that influence or determine the success or the lack of success of your writing? Well, one of them is telos in Greek. We translate it as goal or purpose, okay? A good example, I put it up for you, would be you have a carpenter. Think of a carpenter. He has to make a chair. Why does he make the chair? What's the purpose of a chair? Well, why? Of course, you're going to say it's to sit on. Yes, the success of that chair, if you want to put it that way, is going to be, well, it's a comfortable chair. The one in the picture might not look to you as very comfortable, but it successfully represents what we know of a chair. Okay? It's the same with writing. What is the purpose of what you're writing? We tell our students that purpose is going to determine, to a large extent, your choices when it comes to actually drafting that piece of writing. Another fun word for you today, kairos. Of course, Greek again, and we translate it as setting, timing, or opportunity. Imagine kairos as being a general principle that cuts through our choices. We make our choices about what to write about, how to write about it, to whom we write about it, depending on the setting that we're in. Today, for instance, our setting is here. It's in this studio, lovely studio at the Nazarbayev University, but the actual larger setting is this community of people interested in academic writing. So a lot of my choices as a speaker to you today were determined by such setting or contextual factors. Now, why is this concept fun or really, really good for students to have? Because it explains how writing can fail or succeed, okay? And that independent of how correct it sounds from the point of view of content or grammar, okay? We translate it normally as setting, but it is better understood as timing, okay, or opportunity. Think of a deadline, okay? What's a deadline? It's a constraint that the setting imposes on us. So it's part of a setting. But by the same token, it's an opportunity, is it not? It's an opportunity for the students to show, to demonstrate that they have mastered this messy process of writing that Małgorzata was talking about. So missing a deadline, you could think, or some of our students think, missing a deadline is problematic because you're not going to get the grade that you want. Well, yeah, but by the same token, it's a missed opportunity, okay? This is what we're trying to make them understand. Missing a deadline is missing an opportunity to show how good you are, how much you understand of what you're doing and what we're doing in academic writing. Good. Now with some fun words under our belts, we can go on. Academic writing for us, and this is part of the framework, theoretical framework of what we do, academic writing is an important tool or important set of tools and skills that students need to acquire in their process of apprenticeship, disciplinary apprenticeship. They start as apprentices in the disciplines, in these discourse communities. And what that means, because I really don't want to sound too fancy, what that means simply is that disciplines are communities that are built around values associated with knowledge. Okay, that's what it basically means. So for students as well as for us, a course of study like a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD is just a stage in a student's gradual passage from apprenticeship to full membership in a discipline. So you can imagine this as something like this, okay? Undergraduates go into disciplines without being in this kind of situation of novices, of beginners. They have to listen a lot. They listen to the conversation, to the academic conversation that they hear through the voices of their professors. They listen to that, and then they, to a large extent, repeat back. With master's students, we're in the situation of people who have learned how to sound academic because they know the conversation very well. Maybe they don't have yet a big contribution to make, something, a new piece of knowledge to offer, but they definitely sound like academics. Finally, with PhD students, and this is the best lot, the best situation that we all hope for. With PhD students, we're closer and closer to full membership, full participation in a discipline. Some of them will really be fortunate enough to make a contribution, to bring something into the world that other people will benefit from. So in this process of apprenticeship, genres are key to training students for this full participation in their chosen community. And that's because genres are simply ways to get things done in those communities. I will give you an example, so stay with me for now. What I want you to think, because I know that you must have some notion of genre that you use in your everyday lives. Yes? Let's try to consider that first. Okay? A definition of genre that we all operate with would be, when we think of fairy tales or novels or horror movies, we think of genre as a type of writing or a type of film, if you want, recognizable by a set of stylistic or textual features. And that's a good definition, good definition. But by the same token, it does leave something out. And what it leaves out the context. It focuses too much on the text itself and leaves out the context. So that's why we propose to our students a slightly more academic sounding or fancy sounding definition that has the virtue of paying attention to these contextual factors that are so important, that determine the success of our writing or the lack sometimes of success. And that was proposed some time ago, but it's still a very good definition of genre as a typified response to a recurring situation. I have put up some explanations for you as to what that fancy sounding talk means. Typified just means characteristic, typical, while recurring means something that happens repeatedly, tends to repeat itself. Okay? So here's an example, because all this talk might sound very abstract. Here's an example that you must all be familiar with, the research article. We talk about it in different ways. There's just a journal article, or peer review article, or scholarly article, but let's just call it research article for this particular purpose, because I want you to make the connection between this journal format and research, the process of research itself. Okay, the research article as a genre is fundamental, as you know, to disciplinary activities. It's a response. How do we understand this part of the definition? That it is a response to a recurring situation. What's that recurring situation? Well, it's basically the typical or the basic social situation of research, which is defined by the exigency or objective, institutionalized need to make a contribution to knowledge. Okay? So it's a dedicated genre for making a contribution to knowledge. Think of it this way. You probably have experience with a textbook. Yes. What does a textbook do? It communicates information, old knowledge that is now verified and sort of solidified for an audience of beginners, or not necessarily beginners, but an audience who still tries to learn the basics or the fundamentals of that, say, field or discipline or topic. That's what a textbook is and does. Yes, it has a purpose of communicating old knowledge to an audience of not necessarily experts, as in less than expert audiences. The research article is different. It's quite different. Because what does it do? It communicates a claim to make a contribution to knowledge, to new knowledge, therefore, and it does so for an audience of experts. Okay. Now, why is the research article a good example of a genre? Because it's a very good example of a typified response, meaning that it has a very, very characteristic structure and recognizable conventions. Yes? So, and you probably are familiar already with this format. We talk about IMRAD as the standard format in scientific publishing at the moment. And I say at the moment because genres, do not think of genres as static, fixed things. They change a lot. And the research articles, a genre has been changing since the 1940s quite a bit. And right now, under the pressures of multi and interdisciplinary research, it is in the process of changing right now. But what we're talking about to our students as a tool to introduce them to the exigency of research is this way of looking at published research, at a research article, as a series of answers to fundamental questions. Okay? So you start with the introduction, and the purpose of the introduction is first and foremost to explain why that research, your research, is necessary. Okay? And then you move on to methods. How are you going to accomplish what you want to accomplish? Results. What did you find? What did you find in your research through your methods? And finally, the discussion and conclusion sections would have the job of answering the question, so what? Because findings don't talk for themselves. You have to interpret them for your community. You have to tell them why they're important and who should care and why they should care and what that brings to the table. Again, to join the conversation, remember to bring something to the table. Okay, so we walk students through all this. What do they learn? What do they know after that? Well, they understand the research process a bit better. They understand that research has to answer all of those questions. If it fails to answer those questions, the audience and the purpose of the research article will have been missed. They also understand that scientific writing is not just about communicating information. Remember what we were talking about with the textbook thing, okay? So not all scientific writing is textbook writing. The research genres are associated with making a claim, making a contribution to knowledge, so creating new knowledge. But in order to do that, you have to make an argument that this is indeed new knowledge. So you have to put forward a strong claim, and you have to bring in strong evidence, strong reasons why your community should take your contribution seriously. And of course, finally, oh, and by the way, you will probably hear from Małgorzata more on this, but while we're on the topic of argument, when you make an argument, what do you say? You join the conversation, you respond to others, and sometimes you will have to say I in your research article, I or we. Normally, you would expect people to, or writing teachers to tell you, do not use I or we in scientific writing because it's a measure or a mark of subjectivity. Yes and no. And if you look at the research that's been published on research articles and research literature, the trend increasingly is towards the use of I and we, even in disciplines that are not normally associated with the use of I or we. Why is that? Think a little bit, okay? It's about marking your position, making clear what your position is vis-a-vis or against the position of others. Yes? That's all what all the first person pronoun does. It says, I stand here in relation to they, to this community that I am engaging with. Okay? So it's a lot to talk about, but I just wanted to mention this, and Małgorzata will return to it a bit later. So finally, what our students learn by learning or knowing this genre of the research article is basically to write in other research-related genres. And there are other related research genres that you know very well from your everyday experience, namely abstracts, conference papers, or master's theses, PhD dissertations, and so on. Okay, and that brings us to how many types, how many genres there are. Many. The answer is many. I've put some examples up for you, but the whole point would be to say that all of these genres, whether they're disciplinary, as in research-related, or professional, so they're outward-facing, they involve other types of ventures, like if you're a professional that works in the industry, right? You're not going to be doing research, straight research, but you will be doing things that are informed by research, okay? And you will be using other genres, like project proposals, feasibility reports, and so on. Most of these genres, disciplinary or professional, are open, but some of them are not. What does that mean? Some of them are public, so they will be published somewhere and readily accessible. Some will be merely supporting, okay? And these, even though they're hidden from the public, from the larger public, they're very, very important. There are things like motivation letters or CVs or grant proposals, and a lot of things hang on those genres. Finally, of course, there are the academic genres that our students write in their courses, like research papers or term papers. These, of course, are pedagogical genres that we use to teach them about academic genres. But even more importantly, what we teach them is that all of these genres are connected. They form sets, whole sets and systems of genres. And those sets and systems of genres support other activities, our normal, everyday activities, our ways of doing things in the academe, in the classroom, in the lab, in the meeting room. All of these genres, if you look at them and you put them together, you realize all of these genres define what we do. It's as simple as that and as complex as that. So, as a final reflection, what do we teach our students when we teach them genres? We teach students that such genres are opportunities for participation. This is what they need to learn. They need to learn these genres if they want to become full participants in a discipline, how to do things successfully in the disciplines, and how to position themselves as members, as serious scholars, as people who are not only informed, knowledgeable, but they're also collegial and full of integrity and objective. So people that you want to listen to, okay? So for us, as teachers of academic writing, this is why knowing a genre becomes important, because knowing a genre becomes a way of knowing how to take them up, how to take a genre up and redeploy it and adapt it, if necessary, to the needs of your own context, so to speak, to the needs of your own audience. Adapt them to your own purpose, maybe. And that's because this very nice and final fun word for the day that I give you, uptake, because this way of taking up, knowing how to take up a genre, is basically that very precious space between imitation, imitating the conventions of a genre, and invention, adapting it, using it creatively, using it to achieve new goals, to fit a different setting, to create new opportunities for you, for your research, for your community. So that's what I had to prepare it for you for today, and I'm sure that Malgorzata will have more to say about invention, or the border between imitation and invention. So I will see you shortly, and in the meanwhile, enjoy Malgorzata's presentation.
Thank you. As we switch chairs here, literally. So hopefully you also got a glimpse of the caliber of our tremendous talent in our writing center. What you got was a brilliant unpacking of key terminology used in writing center pedagogy and approaches in academic writing. So thank you very much, Adina. And this may have been a bit difficult for you to follow along. Hopefully the slides were useful to you, and I encourage you to research on your own a lot of these terminology in order to better understand what we keep talking about as the process of writing, that it is process-driven. One of the things that Adina so brilliantly talked about was the idea that what we do in academic writing is the response, and it is a response to some type of urgency. Something needs to be resolved, something needs to be, there needs to be another contribution to the conversation. So keep that in mind in terms of the motive for writing. But let's now take it to a very simple level of trying to understand language, the role of language in academic writing. There's kind of this concept that if it sounds like academic writing, then it must be academic writing. And a lot of, especially beginning writers, our students, take on a kind of imitation stance of having read maybe some research articles or textbooks. They then try to use a lot of this jargon and words and even sentence structure, but they fail in terms of their idea of what makes successful academic writing. So we're briefly going to touch on some of these expectations, both from the writer end and the reader end. On a language level, what about language itself? As you know, academics are often criticizing for using specific jargon, words that seem to exclude others in the conversation. And this is partly because we gradually acquire a certain language in the sense that Adina explained to you the phases even of going from being an undergraduate student to someone who is contributing in the field as a professional. So during this process, we acquire a certain kind of language that serves as a kind of shortcut. It signals certain concepts and theories that may be very difficult, as you can see with Adina unpacking a lot of that terminology. These are very difficult concepts to discuss. And so we acquire these certain terms in order to be able to have that conversation at the dinner table and at least have a starting point for our conversation. It also allows us to go into a deeper conversation within our field, perhaps with specialists or people who are using this on a practical level, applying the principles of or theories of. But this specialized language can also detract from the conversation, and it could even create a barrier for our readings. So what we often see with beginning writers is that they start acquiring the lingo, the language, but it's not natural to them, and so they're merely imitating it. It's not their language. It can also be used as a kind of protective shield that excludes other voices and a way to mark intellectual territory, which in the long run stifles dialogue rather than encouraging more voices, more people at the table. So how do we maneuver around the demand to be both authorities in the field, which is the expectation of the reader certainly, and to remain accessible, in other words, to invite others here to discuss this with us, because that's at the heart of critical thinking and critical writing. To use words to connect with participants and not just to display our academic mastery, a kind of showing off. This is the balance. This is the trick that a lot of us go through our academic careers and professional writers in trying to figure out at what point am I addressing this to a highly specialized audience, and at what point does this still have to be accessible? This gets at the heart of what we call good writing, and we have a lot of discussions about this. Well, how do we qualify that? How do we recognize good writing? And then how do we promote it? How do we support it? We have certainly all read literature in our field that is written by brilliant minds, but takes tremendous effort to understand and engage with. And in some ways, academia has encouraged this kind of difficulty because it deals with some very difficult ideas. And it tolerates, therefore, if it's a brilliant mind, will put up with not the clearest of writing in order to hear out these grand theories, these ideas and concepts. But this is also the problem and why we often are criticized for excluding. Underneath it is a kind of selfish motive that the writer shouldn't care about the reader's experience. And as scholars, we all tend to live in our heads, and to us, our thoughts make perfect sense. So why shouldn't they to the audience, to the reader? This is where the process unfolds, because we have to recognize the reader's experience within our writing process. The underlying mythos has changed in the last couple of decades. As Adina pointed out, this is constantly in flux and being redefined. There is no one manual that we can use for academic writing. And it's largely due to pedagogies arising out of writing center model and the establishment of academic writing as an actual subfield. Even the very deeply embedded taboo of not using the first person voice has been challenged, and because it upholds a kind of hidden authority that has proven to be a problem. In this current model of academic writing, the reader's experience drives the writing experience, with such criteria as honesty, accessibility, and most important, precision and clarity as factors shaping our writing. So what does it mean to encourage writers to produce language that is clear and precise? Isn't this a given? Isn't this what we think we are already doing? And how does this look in international settings, such as Nazarbayev University or in Erasmus programs, which encourage intercultural experiences of communication? Well, let's take a look at how the APA guidelines, the American Psychological Association guidelines, define precision and clarity. It defines it in kind of a negative way because it says to try and avoid ambiguous language, jargon, and approximate language. Gives us some clues as to what to avoid. But how to choose that kind of precision, especially when it comes to defining clarity? How do we even think about that? It must be easy to follow for the reader. The terms must be defined. The logic of the argument is apparent in the way the paper is organized and structured. And genre has much to do with it. In reflecting on what Adina has presented, a very excellent exploration of genre models and genre types. So much of that is determined by the actual genre. If we think about precision writing in an even more specific field, say with technical communication, which I am teaching this semester, or professional writing, we have to be looking at things like precision writing used in manuals, used in directions, used in not just persuasive purposes, but also for information. Sometimes life and death matters if we look at the biomedical field, and I have many students involved in that. We are also talking about conciseness in these cases, especially in these cases. And that means using just enough words, not too many and not too few, in order to make the reader come to the place where you are as a writer. There's a kind of meeting ground there between the reader and the writer. So we are once again talking about a shared language, and we keep coming back to this. How do we learn that language? How is that language established? Where is this space for us within that language? And within that, we also come back to our mission, being a writing center, and that is to support a culture of writing. And that includes all forms of communication, because not only are you learning the format, say in an MRAD report, but you're learning a way of organizing your thinking process, and then how to present that within different arenas, whether they be for the general public or for a highly specialized organization or presentation. With that, I'm going to invite Adina back in, because she will be sharing with you our webpage at the Writing Center, which you might find useful for resources and other information. Thank you. Adina?
Thank you, Małgorzata. Hello again. I will just keep you for a couple more minutes to tell you that if you're interested in what we do and you found things that you might want to know more about, you find information about what we actually do to create and support a culture of writing across our university, but we would be happy to continue to do that in a more public-facing capacity. Do take a look at our new website, of which we're awfully proud. It's still somewhat under construction. We're still adding to it. We're still building it, but we're very excited about it. If you go there, you're going to find out what we do. And I put up just a screenshot of our homepage. As you can see, there are two major tabs here. One is for the students and the other is for faculty. But basically, and here's another I clipped for you on the tab for faculty. And this is the type of information that you can find there. These are the kinds of initiatives and activities that we're engaged in order to truly support a culture of writing, of academic writing. And that includes courses in communication and writing. It also includes writing tutorials which are basically like one-on-one sessions with students at Nazarbayev University who come to us with their assignments, with their questions, often with their anxieties about writing, and we help them with that. We help them through such roughly 45-minute long one-on-one sessions. We also have, and that's basically our way of supporting the community of students, but we also have an initiative that supports faculty who teach writing in their own disciplines. They teach courses that require writing, a lot of writing, and that's what we call the WAC initiative, which means writing across the curriculum. We also have a variety of other initiatives. I will not keep talking at length about us because we really want to hear from you and answer some questions. With that, I will ask Małgorzata to step right back into the frame.
We're back.
We're ready to take your questions. Now, if you have any, you might want to...
Are we in the picture? We're good?
Okay. All right. So, how...
Will you be giving us the questions just so that we know the procedure?
So thank you, Adina. Thank you, Małgorzata, for your excellent presentations. You see you have many questions. So can we start with those questions?
Yes.
How to write a letter for publication in journals included in the, HAC list?
We don't know what the HAC list
I
is.
don't know either. What is the list?
Can we move on to the second question and maybe get back for clarification?
Maybe, yes, maybe someone will clarify what they mean by HAC. Would you please explain what skills are required for academic writing? A very general question.
Sure.
To cover everything, yeah? Please.
Well, I'll start with one of the main skills that you learn along the way in good academic writing is organizational skills. Because if we're talking about a process that's multi-layered, we're getting feedback. Is our audio okay? On your end? Audio okay? Okay. Organizational skills and almost like project management, because you're dealing with secondary sources, you might be dealing with primary research, and then how to articulate your own thoughts about this while doing effective summary writing. So all of these are very specific skills, and when we have our first year rhetoric and composition course to our first year students, we very slowly use a scaffolding approach, which introduces them to how to write effective summaries, which they then can use on secondary sources, and it moves into effective quotations and citations, and then moving into how to paraphrase, how to do effective research. So all of these are skills that then you continue drawing on through your career. Anything else you'd like to add to that, Adina?
Maybe just a little accent there. A lot of students that we see rush ahead, and we think that it's very, very important for them not to do that and to learn. I think that one of the most basic skills for academic writing are summarizing and paraphrasing. Małgorzata mentioned them already, but they're so fundamental that I think a lot of students think that they're trivial. Oh, you want me to summarize? Didn't you read it? You too know what it is about. And yet they have to learn how to do this in order to make sure that they don't borrow too much from those sources and they sound academic on their own without imitating too much. Yes. So reverting to that idea of imitation versus invention, there's a role for imitation, but only if it leads to invention, to your own contribution. Yes. So nothing to add major other than this little emphasis that I want to put on simple skills that are actually the hardest and the most essential ones. Okay.
Can we take another question?
Yes, Małgorzata. What intercultural issues influence the content of the papers of supporting genre? Could you give any tips to overcome possible misunderstanding?
This is an excellent question. It's very, very, very perceptive and relevant. First of all, I didn't give an example of a supporting genre, or not too many, but for instance, one classic example or a fundamental genre, supporting genre, is the so-called statement of purpose, right? That graduates or people who want to go into graduate programs have to write. Yes, and this is a very tough genre to learn and to practice. We give a lot of advice to our students to these kinds of statements of purpose, or just motivation letters in general for various purposes, right? This is a very good example of a supporting genre that is that's affected by intercultural issues. For instance, how relevant is it for a student at Nazarbayev University to give information in their motivation letter about how highly ranked their program is in Eurasia, or in this area, if they're applying somewhere in the States, right? Some departments might not be very impressed with that kind of information. Or what do we tell our students? Should they do that? I often tell my students, look, if you really are doing this in the spirit of telling your audience a little bit more about where you're coming from, you're safe. But if you're doing it just to sound very important, you're probably not going to impress them. Okay, so it depends. This is a hard thing for us. It's always a negotiation. It's always contextual. We need to know, what program are you writing for? What is the supporting genre that you're writing in? What are your specific circumstances? And then we can give you advice depending on the situation. There's no one piece of advice that will fit all situations.
And if I could just add, on a language level, one of the things that I have noticed, having taught in Asia and Eastern Europe also, is the idea that in the English language, it's a very direct language, and it demands a kind of directness that sometimes is uncomfortable for beginning writers, in the sense that right away in the introduction, we expect to be given what you are writing about and the results, and in some ways your conclusion already. This seems alien to a lot of students, and not only are they using their third or fourth language, I'm constantly impressed by the trilingualism in this area, but it's a way of structuring the whole argument that they have to rethink, because they're not used to that kind of, tell us right away from the beginning exactly what you're writing about. So that might be grounds for a bit of a misunderstanding. And until you understand that the format is there to support this kind of argumentative structure, it does take a bit of getting used to, an adjustment. Hopefully that answers your question. It's a good one.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you have any electronic open manuals for this discipline, primarily for PhD students? We have this discipline in PhD teaching plans, and we need more sources to share them with PhD students. Could you please offer us these e-sources in net?
Okay, there is a very good resource that I would recommend for such purposes, and that is the WAC Clearinghouse website. Their job, their mission is to publish a lot of literature supporting writing, academic writing, on their website. So I don't have a link right now with me, but it's pretty easy to find. I'm gonna just type up the name of the website into the chat, so people can, our audience can take that and just simply Google it and find it.
It'll also be offered on our website through our WAC page. And when we say WAC, we are saying WAC. It stands for Writing Across the Curriculum. So we'll put up that link after this session. It's easy enough to do, and it is a wonderful clearinghouse. Yeah, I see here a lot of messages about the sound problem and echo. Hopefully that has been resolved. Yeah, I think it's better. Thank you.
Okay, we're having a problem again.
Next question, could you please, how can one ensure him or herself of sounding academic in her writing? What are the practicalities, strategies, or checklists for the writer?
Shall I begin and we can relay on that? So one of the things that I hope you understood from the section that I offered to you is that you don't just want to sound academic. You want to be able to think in an academic way in order to be a part of this community. So I'm not quite sure if that question is regarding the level of sophistication that's expected if you're a master's student or a PhD student. But let's rethink that. Let's really rethink what it means to write academically. So you're asking for practicalities, strategies, and a checklist. A lot of it, it has to do with genre writing. So first of all, be clear about what the expectations are. Are you writing a dissertation? Are you writing an MRAD report? Are you writing a manual? From there, you probably already have the topic, the content, and that will decide how academic it should be, because once again, everything revolves around your readers. So knowing who your intended audience is in some ways defines the writing. Anything to add to that?
Yes, again, not much to add, just an accent. I fully agree with Małgorzata. So it's not, the important thing is not to just sound academic, but become an academic, think like an academic, work like an academic. So it's not so much a matter of a checklist. In time, if you immerse yourself in this kind of community, you will acquire a basic set of skills. And we do sort of provide instruction in those particular skills, depending, again, on the purpose of your writing, on the audience of your writing. So we can't provide a fit-for-all kind of checklist for sounding academic, but we can assure you that if you stay with us, for instance, if you take our classes, if you come to our writing center hours, if you're taking instruction in academic writing, what you will end up with is going to be a basic set of skills that will allow you to not just sound more academic, but be academic, become an academic, become more academic.
And I might add to that, for those of you who aren't fortunate enough to have a writing center staff the way that we are equipped here, the more you write, the better you get at it. If you have people around you who can give you concise feedback and have your best interests at heart in promoting you as a good writer. So I understand writing centers are still kind of a new thing in many regions around here. So you may not have the kind of support we offer to our students. So the best advice is to take every opportunity to write. And that means across disciplines and across genres. I encourage my students in my technical and professional writing class to also develop themselves as creative writers, because you are experimenting with voices. You're experimenting with how to articulate ideas that are often very difficult, and one will always support another. So the best advice that I have is to use every opportunity you can to write and to receive feedback and become very familiar and at ease with the revision process, because writing is mainly a process of constant revisions based on readers' needs. So hopefully that will help those of you who don't have the support system that we have available here at Nazarbayev.
Thank you.
One more question. Could you please give an information about writing tutorials in detail, where, how, etc.?
Okay.
Well, specific to Nazarbayev, we have it actually as part of our student support systems here in our writing program. Tutorials, I imagine that they might be available on the web now. I don't quite know in terms of private tutorials, but mainly what we talk about is the actual structure of a tutorial, which focuses on individually tailoring writing advice. We're kind of supporting them in becoming good writers. So we're not proofreaders. We're not editors. We don't just clean up the grammar, although sometimes that happens within a consultation. We actually have a whole training program revolving around writing fellows, developing a program here in-house with students who are very much interested in developing their own skills as tutors. And we are training them in the pedagogy and the approaches on how to facilitate and support this writing culture. So we are fortunate here in that we are developing it constantly. But on your own, anytime you can have this kind of situation where you have one-to-one consultation, it's a very relevant and valuable kind of approach to getting better writing advice in a way.
Okay, if I may add just this little bit in answer to your question. So obviously our tutorials happen on campus here in Astana. And they happen with our students. They take about 45 minutes. They have to sign up for them. There's a whole online system for it. So we meet for 45 minutes and we talk, as Malgorzata pointed out, we talk, give them tailored advice on their actual assignment or problem, whatever it is. But we also do something else in our classes and in our tutorials and so on. We encourage people to team up. So if you're interested in developing your own writing, try to find like-minded people at your university or wherever you are, people who also want to become better writers. And then decide to meet like regularly, once every 2 weeks, for instance. Sit down, talk about your writing, share writing that you've done, ask for advice, share your feedback, be generous. These are some essential tools of a good writer. Be generous, read a lot, write a lot, meet up, and don't be afraid to share your writing. Okay? So even though you might not have the writing center support that we have here, there are still things that you can do to improve your own writing.
Within this paradigm of a peer review model. So that's what we're talking about.
Thanks a lot. And coming back to that question, the person has clarified this is not HAC but WAC, something like, Scopus, Thomson, Reuters journals. So the question was how to write a letter for publication in journals, including in that list probably, but I don't know whether this is a question to you.
It seems like they're asking how to write a letter of intent for publication. That's my understanding, which is a specific format where you try to gauge the interest of a publishing house being interested in your work. And that's a specific genre. There's lots of information available on that. It's basically summarizing your work and promoting it in a way that you're checking if this is something they're interested in publishing.
What I would like to add to this is maybe for clarification purposes, there are actually a number of genres associated with such letters of intent, because if you're trying to publish a whole book, you're going to have to write a book proposal, which is a fairly involved kind of document. And there's some advice even online about how to do that. And the first port of call for that is, of course, the publisher's website. Some of them provide templates for that. And they tell you exactly what they expect from you. Okay? So always, always, always check with the publisher first, with the editor of the journal. And if you have to write, make sure that your question is not already answered on their website. Okay? Because that usually does not create a lot of goodwill on the other side.
Okay, thank you. One more question has arrived. Could you also provide us with the information about seminars carried out by you for academic writing teachers, please?
You will find that on our Writing Center website that we usually list the topics. I believe we do, yeah, and we are trying to keep it updated. So you could at least see the topics because we have them throughout the semester constantly. So there's a number of them. And I can tell you the most popular ones. The most popular ones are motivation letters. What else is very popular? Research design, the argument, how to paraphrase in order to avoid plagiarism.
How to be clear and concise. say what you mean, basically.
So we offer them constantly, and usually we do list them, the general ones that we offer, and we're constantly developing new ideas to address new issues.
So if you have, for instance, a good idea for that kind of seminar, we would be very happy to hear what your idea would be, what you would like to hear about, because we often develop these seminars and workshops based on what we hear from our students, from the other teachers in other departments, from other professors teaching writing in their courses, what is of interest to them. Okay.
This, of course, is offered to our students right now, but maybe in the future might be developed through online deliveries.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you once more for your excellent presentations, for your, generous support and readiness to organize, to prepare this wonderful webinar. You see, it is, very interesting. People are very interested. You have so many questions. I'm afraid there will be still more questions, but we stop now accepting questions. And I think that maybe individual teachers and students, PhD or master students, might bombard you with their suggestions, requests, but maybe it would be better if in a structured way, universities, rectors of universities could contact the Writing Center and maybe ask to share the experience of how to establish it, how to operate the activity of the Writing Center, so that each university in Kazakhstan has its own academic writing center. But maybe this is the future. But at present, you do not refuse, and thank you again for your generous readiness to welcome suggestions or requests from individuals. And maybe they can benefit from the trainings that you provide at your academic writing center.
Well, we would love to promote this model throughout the region. And we have a wonderful director, Carrie Batinsky, who is very accessible and very enthusiastic about spreading our experiences. So thank you for this opportunity. It was a pleasure to meet you and your students and educators.
Thank you.
And I think that it is possible also through the office of experience sharing, because Nazarbayev University has this mission to share the experience. So maybe those universities that are interested can cooperate with you even within the experience sharing format. And our universities can certainly inform their university leadership about the webinar, about such an interesting writing center, and there could be some, initiatives on behalf of our universities. But anyhow, I would like to thank also the listeners, the participants of the seminar. They were very patient, and we really appreciate and extremely grateful to you, Malgorzata, to you, Adina, to Ricardo, to Ayman, and to all those people whom we mentioned at the beginning of our seminar. Thank you so much, and looking for further cooperation with you and with Nazarbayev University.
We thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So.